everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about this book right here, Gus, The Life and Opinions of the Last Raffles Banded Langur by John Grisham. So I actually went to an event at a local bookstore in Singapore called Book Bar, and it was a author in conversation kind of session with two authors, John Gresham talking about this book, as well as Bali talking about her new book called Now You See Us. So I was really excited to pick up a copy and, of course, get my copy signed because I am superficial like that. So I did get a signed copy. And actually, you can see that this is from April, I believe, or maybe that says August. But either way, it's been a while since that event and since I've read this book. But I did want to cover it because it is Singaporean fiction and I thought it was really interesting. And so I'll give it a little bit of an overview of what it's about and then whether I recommend it or not. So I think what really attracted me to the event in the first place is the theme of the talk between the two authors was on nature and nature in Singapore and nature in Singapore in particular. And I think if you've been to Singapore or you've heard anything about Singapore, you'll know that it's very man made. There's not a lot of nature here. It's a very small island to begin with, it's a city state. And I think the common perception is that of like crazy rich Asians, like whatever gardens there are, they're air conditioned, like Gardens by the Bay is air conditioned, et cetera, et cetera. But I think something that happened during the pandemic as we were kind of forced to stay within Singapore's borders is there was a huge renewed interest in exploring Singapore and the nature that we do have. And so this manifested in a few different ways. Number one, everyone picked up cycling. Like so many of my friends became like hardcore cycling enthusiasts because they wanted to be able to do something outside and have like an outdoor activity. Also, because the roads were really quiet, it seemed like it was really fun to cycle because it wasn't as congested without the tourists that would normally be here. I think another thing that happened is people started to really try to explore like what nature we do have. So I was involved in producing a documentary on one of the small islands off the coast of Singapore called Pulau Brani. And as I was doing the research for that documentary, one of the experts I talked to did mention that during the pandemic, a lot of Singaporeans or people living here were interested in going on tours of the southern islands that are off of the coast of Singapore, but still comprising Singapore. So there was a lot more interest in visiting Lazarus and St. John's and, maybe doing a lot more hiking, going to the old rail corridor, Bukit Timah. And I find that overall trend really fascinating because I feel like even though we objectively don't have great nature here in Singapore, there's like a really cool mind shift set that you can do where you just sort of appreciate what we do have. And when you approach Singapore's nature with wonder and with an open mind, you can really find a lot of interesting pockets of nature in Singapore. And what was cool about this book talk is I realized that it even extended to authors. And obviously, that makes sense that creators and artists and filmmakers and everyone would be affected by the same kind of broader trends. But it was really made apparent because in the talk, both Bali and John mentioned being quarantined during COVID and that really forcing them to think about a sense of place. What does it mean to have nature in Singapore, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of the theme of the talk. I think for John's book in particular, it's really relevant because the main premise of this book is that primates have learned how to talk and they are leading a revolution against the humans in Singapore. They are taking over and along with like other creatures and animals, they're very angry at humans for destroying nature, tearing things down, overdeveloping, and they want to regain their rightful place at the top of the hierarchy and basically attack and subjugate humans. So that theme of like human destruction of nature having consequences and animals fighting back is kind of the main theme of this book. A bit heavy handed, and that's actually part of my criticism that I'll get into later. But that's very clearly tied to, I think, John and all of our experience being locked down in Singapore and trying to, find pockets of nature, but realizing that this nature has been significantly minimized for development purposes, or even when you walk along the old rail corridor, you still are like right by the expressway, so you hear the cars. And I think John mentioned like going on long walks and like going around Singapore, and that making him really think about nature as a character. So, just to describe what happens in the book, we're following the first person point of view of a monkey called Gus. I do think the character of Gus was very quirky. He's erudite, he's well read, but he started out as a performer, like a street monkey performer, abused by someone in Jakarta who was forcing him to walk along the streets to beg for money. And he has made it back to Singapore, and he's trying to be reunited with his family in Bukit Timah, which is the tallest mountain, it's really more of a hill, in Singapore. And as he's going along this journey or this quest, the revolution unfolds, the animals are taking over, and there's also this phenomena happening of humans turning. And so some of the humans are turning into monkeys if they've been bitten or basically have had contact with the various primates. And he is basically accompanied throughout the whole story by another character, which is Charlie Tan. And Charlie Tan is a Singaporean office worker who goes through the mundane everyday actions of his life, not very happy. I think he works either in accounting or at a bank, but his true dream is to be a clown. So he has I think his mother has passed away, but he has a very traditional father who doesn't understand his dream and has always told him, be practical, just focus on making money, and that's, what you should be worried about. So as Gus is trying to make his way back to Bukit Timah, and Charlie is trying to basically not get eaten or killed by the monkeys that are like wreaking havoc all throughout Singapore, we go through different scenes and different like escalations and parts of this war. And actually, I think the timeline of the book is a bit too long, but we do cover like multiple years of the monkeys taking over, groups of humans trying to like make encampments to protect themselves, and then also like some negotiations between Charlie and Gus and the Monkey King. And then there's like another big ape who is called General Cork, who is like in charge of the monkey military. And so you're basically watching this like uprising, post-apocalyptic or becoming apocalyptic scene unfolding. Meanwhile, you have like the smaller dramas of the different characters. Charlie trying to navigate his relationship with his father. He meets a policewoman named Noor who he falls in love with, and various different characters that you stumble across as they're just trying to survive. Another character that is critical to the story and who I really liked, her name is Juliet, and she's a Filipino nurse. And I think she meets Charlie because she's caring for Charlie's boss who's been bitten. And so she just gets pulled into everything as well. And I really appreciate Singaporean literature that includes like all characters of our society and not just the main characters that tend to be on the page. And so it was nice to have this look at like how would this affect like overseas migrant workers? How would this affect like the nurses? And there's also a really funny scene where there's this group of expats that are like eating like cannibals. They're like eating other humans. And so like it's kind of funny to see the different like segments of society depicted in like an almost satirical way. And also, he's trying to like demonstrate what would happen, how these different groups of people would react or act in very like dramatic and kind of silly, but also truthful ways given the situation. And so as the like rebellion persists and the monkeys are trying to take over, we move from different scenes. We have scenes that take place in kind of the before times in the everyday life of these characters. Then we move to the Blair Road shop houses, which if you live in Singapore or you're friends with me, we all know like those shop houses are really iconic and home to a lot of different types of people. There's like a lot of expats, a lot of older residents that still live there. There used to be some great house parties thrown there, like way before COVID. And so there's a lot of this book that takes place as the humans are trying to survive and camping out in the Blair Road shop houses, which is kind of fun. And then we also obviously follow like a lot of nature. We go to the rail corridor. We go to different jungly parts of Singapore that the monkeys have taken over. And basically, we're trying to figure out, can Charlie save the day? Can we defeat the monkeys? Should we maybe be appeasing the monkeys, trying to live in harmony, or should we be trying to stamp them out? And of course, everyone has a different point of view. There's also like this kind of mythical figure of Charlie's mom, which is kind of interesting because Singapore is home to a lot of like biotech and funding for niche research and development that the Economic Development Board has incentivized to come to Singapore. So the idea is that Charlie's mom was part of this experiment that turned her into like a golden bird that can fly now. So she's also in the mix as well. Maybe I'll talk about what I liked first and then I'll move into what didn't work for me. I really liked the voice of Gus. I thought it was a very well fleshed out character. It's obviously a character that John spent a lot of time with. He's very unique. Like I said, he's well read and very wise, but also has kind of like base animalistic desires. He's really motivated through the story by his desire to meet up with his family. But he's also like funny and snarky. So I feel like that character development was fresh and really interesting. I also liked kind of the amalgamation of like the human characteristics as well as animal characteristics. Like you have animals that talk, but you also have humans that are acting in like very brutish ways. So all in all, I feel like it's a very interesting and vivid world, with some really like beautifully fleshed out in like pictures painted on the page that are like really cool and very unique. So I do think that that in itself has so much value and was really worthy, like laudable or whatever. But I think what didn't work for me is more around like the pacing and the plot. So whilst there were like very interesting like scenes or descriptions, I do feel like this was very tedious to get through. And part of that is because I feel like there is a lot of telling instead of showing about the themes. I feel like even just knowing the premise, I can already guess what some of the themes might be. And so I don't really need it to be hammered over and over and over. And I would have preferred like the themes around animals versus humans, or humanity's role in the destruction of nature, or even some of the themes around like father-son relationships or other types of relationships. They were just so heavy-handed and it made it tedious because I felt like I was not trusted as a reader to pick up on it myself. And on top of that, I felt it was too long. I think it could have been condensed a lot. And especially with the timeline of this war dragging on for multiple years, I feel like the momentum was lost at a certain point. So, like midway to 2/3 of the way through the book, I really had to like force myself to finish it. I didn't feel carried along with the natural impetus of the story or wanting to figure out what happens at the end. So with that, I think I'll give this a 3 out of 5. If you are interested in this theme of like, actually, if you just kind of want like a chaotic, like raucous kind of like depiction of what Singapore might look like if like the monkeys took over, I think that part of this book is really fun. And if you live here and you've been like, I have never read a book, even all the Singaporean fiction I've read, that has like such a strong sense of place, because a lot of times when I read, all the singlet that I read is either like quasi-political or quasi-societal. So there's definitely certain places that always pop up. And actually, I do feel like a lot of singlet is very centered and moved by place. But in particular, like I haven't really read a book that has the Blair Road shop houses as a key character or like a key setting, or all of these kind of depictions and descriptions of nature I find to be quite unique. So I think if you live here and you I think it'd be cool to like see these places mentioned and referenced if you live here. So that might be another reason why you might want to check it out. If you do, definitely let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. And until the next one, keep reading. I hope you're enjoying the beginning of the new year. And I will be back with another book video very soon. Thanks, guys.